Hi, all. It's December 29th. I just wanted to get one last episode in before the year ends. Last week, I had another conversation with Che Webster on his Roleplay Rescue podcast. He's had me on many times through the years now, and we always really do have the best conversations. I'll put a link in the notes, but I highly recommend that you go through all of his episodes. So last week, Che and I talked more about my own preferred subgenre for fantasy, which I call primeval fantasy, of course. I've been ruminating on that conversation since, and I wanted to share some follow up thoughts. First, that one of the most powerful elements in role playing games, part of the eudaimonia of role playing games, if you will, is that players can explore these different settings, these sometimes alien secondary worlds, as Tolkien called them. So, fleshed out, distinctive worlds are needed so that the players have something they can really sink their teeth into. But many role-playing games, notably D&D most of the time, give little in the way of real substance for their worlds. Instead, they often just serve as a thin backdrop for action. That is, with many D&D games, they have settings that are broadly Renaissance looking at first glance, but they lack a sense of solidity, being a shallow hodgepodge of seemingly random, quote unquote, Middle Ages components. Settings that are generic and shallow deprive players of the ability to truly explore these worlds because they offer so little of substance to be explored. And this cheapens the potential experience that they came for. Perhaps this easier path, this generic backdrops instead of developed settings, is what drives some into the gamist tools rather than actual world building. And perhaps this is why many gamers default to the cookie cutter, broad brushed genericism. It's just far easier to use towns and villages as just rejuvenate and resupply centers before racing back to the just as generic dungeons and dragons. Instead of a world to explore, many rely on random hazard or monster or treasure or encounter tables, things sitting in the realm of board gaming. Players just simply cannot get otherworld immersion in a two-dimensional setting or world. Again, the rich depth of a well fleshed out world is a major component needed for what role playing games can offer legitimate exploration. But exploring a secondary world as a group requires not only that the world be well constructed, but for the group to be on the same page about it, to be well informed of it with all of its distinctions and nuances. It's easier for one person, like authors of novels, to imagine and create their worlds. But a perennial problem for gamers, even gamers who know each other well, is having a shared knowledge of that other world. Of course, it's impossible for any two people to have identical experiences or tenets or sensations, even in the primary world. So it's far harder in the secondary worlds. But if we don't try to align our connections, then the gaming experience is going to suffer. That is, if you expect people in the world to react and behave in one way, and I expect something very different, and the GM then expects something even different from both of us, then what we have is chaos. So aligning our bodies of knowledge is needed. So, how do we do this? Accomplishing this unification requires time and effort. There's no magic trick that lets us escape some work here. But if you're lazy, you just can't have excellence. And this applies to role playing as well as anything else. But it doesn't have to feel labored. Obviously, GMs have to give clear exposition to the players about the world so that we can align each of the players' perspectives with their characters' perspectives. GMs should never give any information to players unless their specific characters would be privy to that information. And what people in one region would know or believe may be quite different from those in another part of the world. But some general mindset should be universally shared among the people. The best presentation of information from GMs to players comes in two basic avenues. If it's general and universal, then GMs can just write those things up and send them as emails to the players. Many components of people's worldviews and behaviors in a world or a setting seems likely to fall in this bucket, and so that's most efficiently shared that way. But for each player, the best way to impart information is from one-on-one sessions and pre-session emails or conversations. I discuss using this tool elsewhere. So much of this goes beyond mere details of the world. What does my character know about this or that part of the world? Who's the lord of that castle? Or what are the names of my villagers or my family? What's harder to transmit is the zeitgeist of a particular world or setting. The Star Trek setting is very different from the Star Wars one, which is, of course, very different from Dune and so on. What do people think, behave, and how do they speak in this world? What kinds of things do I expect to happen in the world? Does my character believe that things are broadly safe? Or do I believe that I would get torn to pieces if I left my home village and travel for 2 days in any direction? In my own fantasy subgenre, primeval fantasy, there are a host of presuppositions baked into the world that make elements from other fantasy settings, notably what I term modernic fantasy, totally alien. For example, as I mentioned in my conversation with Che, materialism and atheism would be absurd in my world. Denying supernatural beings and places and forces would be as mad as denying the sunlight or the wind. Pinpointing and conveying the zeitgeist of your worlds to your players is vital when establishing the fundamentals to them. We should work to move away from cookie cutter, bland backdrops that are just there for action. If action is all that you really want in your games, then I really recommend just sticking with board games and miniature war games. Stick with the old dungeon board game. Role-playing games open the door to a deep exploration of different worlds and different settings. So make these worlds rich and real, and the exploration can then thrive. All right, so thanks again for listening. I hope everyone has a good new year. I expect to do a lot more episodes in 2024 and to get a lot done on Primeval Fantasy for publication. Thanks a lot, and I look forward to your comments.